He's tied with Harris in Virginia, is in charge of the swing states, and even has a lead across the country. Today, we'll look at the new electoral map that takes these changes into account. Before we look at the polls, let's narrow the map by marking the states where both candidates have a strong lead. California, Hawaii, Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Maryland, Washington, D.C., and Maine's 1st District are some of the states that Harris is likely to win. On Trump's side, he'll solidly take Utah, Wyoming, Idaho, Montana, North and South Dakota, all but the 2nd District of Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, Indiana, South Carolina, and Alaska. This gives the former president an early lead with 125 electoral votes. In the most recent poll in Virginia, which asked 1,000 adults, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are tied at 45%. This is a big setback for Harris's campaign, especially since Biden won this state by 10.1% 4 years ago. Virginia is a key battleground, but she's not even in charge there. Right now, Arizona, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Michigan are all ahead of Virginia in the race. Virginia is now an important part of the election process thanks to its 13 electoral votes. It's like Donald Trump added it to the battleground map. This poll of people who are registered to vote gives Kamala Harris a narrow 2% lead. But because of the error margin, 2% is not even close to being a comfortable lead. Biden won this race by more than 10 points just 4 years ago, so it's clear that Harris isn't doing as well as she should be. This election is more like the one in 2021, when Republican Glenn Youngkin barely beat Democrat Terry McAuliffe to become governor. Most of that election cycle, McAuliffe was seen as the favorite, and polls showed that he was likely to win. However, Youngkin pulled ahead in the last few weeks. This is similar to how Donald Trump always does. He always does better in late polls, especially in late October and early November, than he does earlier. If things go on like they have in the past, Trump might be able to win Virginia. In that case, Kamala Harris's chances of becoming president are very likely to be 0. New polling from the New York Times also puts Trump ahead of Harris. It is based on the answers of 2,400 registered voters. The New York Times is known for leaning to the left, but in 2020, they were one of the worst pollsters because they overestimated Biden's support. If Trump wins the popular vote or comes very close, he has a great chance of becoming president again. 270 electoral votes are very important, so he could lose the popular vote by as little as 1 to 3 points and still get them. Kamala Harris, on the other hand, needs to be ahead by at least 3 to 5 points across the country to win. She probably won't reach that level as things stand. Now let's look at the electoral map and see which states' candidates are most likely to win by 7 to 15 points. Remember that a solid state is one where the win margin is more than 15 points. Even though Kamala Harris won't have the nearly 20-point lead that Biden did in 2020, she will still win Washington and Oregon. In these states, the margins could get as small as 10 to 15 points. Harris is also likely to win easily in Illinois, which has 19 electoral votes and is likely to be with a margin of less than 15 points. New polls show that Harris still has a slim double-digit lead in Colorado. This is much smaller than the nearly 14-point lead Biden had in 2020. Also in Harris's column are New York and New Jersey. However, these states have had their fair share of Democratic scandals, which makes the outcome less certain than in previous elections. There were claims of sexual harassment against Andrew Cuomo in New York, which led to his resignation. Now we have Governor Kathy Hochul and Mayor Eric Adams. A lot of people don't like either of them. In New Jersey, across the river, Senator Bob Menendez has been found guilty of bribery more than once. Delaware is in the likely group, but it is not as liberal as some of its neighboring states. Trump will get a big boost from the states that are likely to vote for him. First, let's look at Iowa and Ohio. These two states seemed more competitive in 2020 than they really were. Trump turned both Iowa and Ohio red in 2016, winning them by almost 10 points each after Obama had been in charge of those states for years. By 2020, Democrats thought they might be able to take back these states. Polls showed that Trump would only win by 1%, and at times Joe Biden was ahead of him in those polls. But in the end, Trump won Iowa and Ohio by almost the same marks he did in 2016. When we look ahead to 2024, it's clear that Trump will still be the clear favorite in both of these Midwest states. Next, let's talk about Texas. People thought the race would be close in the Lone Star State, mostly because of liberal polls that put it close. Some people even thought Trump would win by only 1%, which is similar to what he thought would happen in Iowa and Ohio. In fact, though, he won Texas by almost 6 points. There was never any doubt that Texas would stay red, and there shouldn't have been. Even though Democratic polls and talking points made it sound like Texas might go blue, Joe Biden didn't really have a chance there. To be sure, the state is slowly moving to the left, but it will probably be decades before a Democrat wins the presidency in Texas. It's a big state, and it will take a long time to get the millions of voters that the Democrats need to win here. With any luck by then, the Midwest will have become a stronghold for Republicans. The Sun Belt is slowly moving to the left, while the Midwest is moving to the right. Texas is still a solid red state for now. It's likely that elections here will become more competitive over time, but the GOP shouldn't worry about that just yet. When it comes to Florida, on the other hand, the Republicans almost always get 30 electoral votes there. Florida wasn't a sure thing back in 2020, due to the fact that Barack Obama won it by such a very small margin in 2012. It was expected to be one of the most heated states. Trump won Florida by a narrow margin in 2016, which made it a very close race. By 2020, though, no one thought Joe Biden would do worse than Hillary Clinton. Still, Trump was able to do better than in 2016. Florida is now firmly in the conservative camp, especially when you compare it to where it was 4 or 8 years ago. Then in 2022, Ron DeSantis won re-election as governor by an amazing 20-point margin, making Florida even more red. Most likely, Trump won't win the state by more than 15 points. A win by 7 to 10 points is more likely. In the last election, these 30 electoral votes were not at all a sure thing. Now they are almost a given for the GOP and Donald Trump. The last district is in Maine. It also looks like a likely Republican stronghold. There are now only 12 states left, with a total of 128 electoral votes. These are the main battlegrounds that will decide who wins the election in the end. No candidate has a good chance of getting 270 electoral votes if they don't win this race. Trump only needs 51 more votes to reach his goal, while Kamala Harris hasn't even reached 200 votes yet. The latest poll from Emerson College on swing states shows that Trump has surprisingly high support. This is especially surprising since Emerson tends to lean left. They were way off about how much support Joe Biden would have in 2020, which makes these new results even better for Trump. 3 of the 7 swing states are ahead of him, and 3 more are tied. Since Trump usually does better than polls show, he is likely to change the outcome in his favor when the polls show a tie. Michigan is the only swing state where Harris is ahead, and even there, it's only by 1%. The vice president is having a hard time with this. When she really needs to win, she's doing awfully in critical states. She needs to get Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. It doesn't look good for her if she can't even get ahead in the polls in those states. In 2020, Joe Biden was ahead by 8% in Wisconsin, but he lost by only 0.6%. In Pennsylvania, he was ahead by 6%, but lost by 1%. Harris is a long way behind Clinton in 2016 and not even close to where Biden was. Let's look at the lean states, which are those where the outcome will depend on a difference of only 2 to 7%. Both campaigns will put a lot of effort into these states because they are very close. First up is New Mexico, which is one of the lean Harris states. Hispanic voters are continuing to move to the right, which is a big problem for Harris. Long term, it will be harder for Democrats to hold on to this state. 2024, however, is less likely to be a big issue because Biden did so well in 2020. For now, the Democrats still have a big lead. The states of New Hampshire and Maine are also in the lean Harris group. Like in 2016, these northeastern states could get really close. She barely beat Trump in New Hampshire, 0.37%, and Maine, 2.9%. Because these states voted for George W. Bush in 2000 and 2004, it's likely that these races will become closer again. Biden was able to make the margins bigger in 2020. Let's delve into the lean Trump states, which are becoming increasingly competitive. North Carolina is a prime example. In 2020, Biden only lost North Carolina by a margin of 1.3%, but Trump's ground game has improved significantly since then. He remains popular among suburban voters, especially in areas like Wake County and Mecklenburg County, which could be pivotal for his success. The demographic shifts in these regions have traditionally favored Democrats, but recent trends suggest that Trump could capitalize on voter dissatisfaction with rising costs and concerns over public safety. If he can engage those swing voters effectively, North Carolina may tilt back in his favor. Another state worth examining is Georgia. This historically Republican stronghold turned blue in 2020, but the state has been trending more competitive in the past few cycles. Trump's influence remains strong, especially among rural voters. However, the recent demographic shifts in metropolitan Atlanta, combined with increased voter turnout from African American and younger voters, have given Harris a fighting chance. Her campaign strategy will need to focus heavily on mobilizing these demographics while countering Trump's support in the more conservative areas of the state. Given the razor-thin margins of the last election, Georgia is likely to remain a battleground and may swing in either direction depending on voter engagement efforts. Next up is Nevada, where the electoral landscape has become more unpredictable. In 2020, Biden won Nevada by a margin of 2.4%, and while Democrats traditionally hold an edge here, the dynamics are shifting. A rising number of Hispanic voters and an influx of new residents from other states could impact the balance. Trump's messaging on economic recovery and personal freedoms resonates well with many Nevadans, especially in the wake of the pandemic's economic fallout. If Trump can galvanize support in suburban areas like Clark County, he might narrow the gap and potentially flip Nevada. Moving on to Pennsylvania, a state that has historically been a bellwether for presidential elections. Trump's focus on economic recovery and job creation could resonate with working-class voters in the Rust Belt regions, particularly those who felt left behind by the previous administration. Meanwhile, Harris's campaign will have to work diligently to maintain the support she garnered in 2020, particularly among urban voters in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. If either candidate can effectively connect with the concerns of Pennsylvania voters regarding inflation and economic stability, they could significantly boost their chances of securing the state's 19 electoral votes. Finally, we cannot overlook Wisconsin. The state has been a hotbed of political activity, with both parties investing heavily in outreach efforts. Trump won Wisconsin in 2016 by a narrow margin, and though he lost it in 2020, he retains a strong base of support there. Harris will need to focus on issues like healthcare and education, which resonate deeply with voters, especially in suburban areas. Wisconsin's diverse population, combined with its competitive nature, makes it a critical battleground that will likely require both candidates to adapt their strategies as the election approaches. As we approach the final stretch of the election cycle, it's clear that both candidates will have to navigate a complex and shifting electoral landscape. With voter sentiment continually evolving and various issues dominating the news cycle, the battle for the presidency is more competitive than ever. The outcome will likely hinge on turnout,